Hello. So I thought I would say a little bit about my autistic self and indeed reflections on the fact that there are many, many who have been diagnosed or suspect that they have an autistic spectrum disorder who are also trans in some way, falling under this banner of trans. This is something that puzzles me. My own diagnosis of Asperger syndrome, which I only received actually probably about 20 years ago now, so kind of relatively well into my midlife as an adult life, as it were. Um, it was quite a process. It involved a psychologist, a neurologist, someone looking at social behavior. It involved interviews with my family. It involves various tests. And it took some time to actually go through that process. Um, I had before then only in recent years, when I started reading some testimonies of people who were autistic and began to associate very strongly with them, not really appreciated this condition fully. And when I had the diagnosis, like many people say, it was really quite a relief because it made a lot of things suddenly made sense to me, the way I was, and this sense that you are not just a socially awkward, um, very disturbed person or whatever, but there are a lot of people who suffer in the same way, and um, the kind of difficulties you have, which for me were around being oversensitive to some physical sensations and over light, for example, flashing lights and sounds being disturbing, having a great love for order and precision. Um, in my earlier life, being very troubled and unsettled whenever there was unpredictability and change. I have moved from that. I think there's actually something I've learned to adapt to and cope with quite well now. But also this idea of having a lack of a so-called theory of mind, which is the inability really to, in the moment, appreciate what potentially somebody else might be thinking and feeling. I really totally lack that ability. There's quite a few other criteria as well that fall into this, but that one is quite striking. This relational inability, if you like. Um, but I hadn't really associated being trans and being, which is certainly something that I have known for a very, very long time, really from childhood. I would say about 4 or 5 was really when I was beginning to get some inkling of having dysphoria, and this certainly became very pronounced by the time I was in my um, coming into puberty, early teens, and so on. Then being in a separate school, boys' school and girls' school. I was literally just right by my old place, actually, seeing the girls' school on the horizon. They used to be right next door to each other. And certainly at that time, I would have rather been, as it were, on the other side of the fence. And through my adolescence and into adulthood, and ever since, that has been very, very clear. Never a day has gone by when that hasn't featured in my sense of happiness and sense of self. So it's really not a fleeting thing or a fad. But I hadn't made this association between trans nature and autism until I started reading about quite a close relationship between the two. Now, I think that it isn't understood yet. I don't think there's much in the way of robust theory around why there seem to be proportionally more people who identify as trans who are autistic, or I guess you can look at it the other way, of the autistic population, perhaps there is a higher percentage who identify as trans as within the general population as a whole. And these are quite significant variations, as I understand it. There are some theories about why there is this seeming overlap, this correlation between a high percentage of autistic people who also identify as trans. Some suggest it's because autistic people are more ready to freely express themselves. Perhaps they understand some of the social nuances and risks even associated with that. I really don't buy that theory myself, but it's one that's out there. Some say it's to do with the hormonal balance in the body. Others say it's to do with brain structure. And possibly also there is a suggestion around a very, very controversial theory about one theory about why trans natures exist. Autogynephilia. This is the idea of, in the case of male to female trans people, being attracted to seeing themselves as a woman, essentially. And perhaps this relates to the idea that we mirror, in the case of a male, the feminine within us, usually in another person. So Carl Jung, the psychologist, wrote about the anima, the animus, this inner essence that it gets reflected in another person. Autogynephilia suggests there's a so-called target error in terms of where the brain identifies what it is seeing. So rather than projecting onto another person, in the case of male to female, to see feminine beauty, that feminine beauty gets embodied, as it were, within the brain of the individual themselves. As I say, it's very controversial, but if there are potentially things about the brain we don't understand that are responsible, or at least a contributor towards autism, maybe there is some element of that theory that could have a bearing. I'm doubtful, but it is a possibility. It seems that with autism, there are more males generally diagnosed, males as they are assigned at birth, at least. It's not the case that everyone's autistic is trans and vice versa. That's definitely not the case. But very interesting that there does seem to be this particularly high proportion of trans people amongst those who are diagnosed or identify as autistic. I can't begin to understand it. I can't quite see where the relationship is potentially. Maybe it is in something to do with this idea of theory of mind and how we identify and try to make sense of what it's like to be another person. I don't know. I don't, it doesn't feel quite right to me that would be an explanation. But maybe there's something there that is a part of the jigsaw, as it were. It may just be almost a coincidence. There may not be a direct correlation. I suspect probably we're not going to easily find the reasons, just as causes for autism. There seem to be many theories around that. And indeed, causes for trans nature are very varied. And yeah, there's going to be quite a mix there. It's not going to be the case that everyone who is trans and autistic is so because of the same conditions, as it were. I would think. But I thought I'd mention this because it's always it's an open, interesting, open question. It's one perhaps that a lot of people who are transcritical maybe don't appreciate as well, and possibly if they might also realize that a lot of trans people are autistic and struggle. It's not just the gender dysphoria, but it's this inability really to get into the minds of other people. Maybe that does reveal something of the complexity of the variety of human life. I'm happy both with my trans self and my autistic self. I'm offering this really just as a reflection, just to offer to folks that might not have appreciated this connection.